They didn't have much, just 2 beat-up bikes, a sick mother, and the kind of desperation that settles into your bones when life won't give you a break. In a world that never gave them the benefit of the doubt, Dorian and Caleb had learned to keep their heads down, show up on time, and hope the lights stayed on for one more month. But then, one morning, while rushing to a low-paying job they couldn't afford to lose, they found a man bleeding on the side of the road. A stranger, a decision, a choice between survival and doing what was right. They never imagined what would come next, because sometimes the moments that feel like the end are really just the beginning of everything. Now let's go back to that cold Brooklyn morning, when 2 brothers were pedaling toward survival, completely unaware that one decision was about to change everything. The streets of Brooklyn were still draped in shadows when 2 bikes sped down the cracked pavement, their rusty chains rattling with every bump. Dorian West, 18, and his younger brother Caleb, 15, leaned forward over the handlebars, their breath rising in clouds beneath the pale orange streetlights. Cold bit at their faces, but neither slowed down. They didn't have the luxury. These bikes weren't just transportation. They were survival. Dorian's frame wobbled slightly, the right handlebar wrapped in worn tape where the grip had fallen off months ago. Caleb's chain skipped once, then again, threatening to come loose like it always did at the worst possible time. "We're cutting it close," Caleb muttered, glancing at the spiderwebbed screen of his old prepaid phone. "I know," Dorian gritted out, pedaling harder. They were headed to Tucker Mart, the rundown corner store that gave them both the only jobs they'd ever managed to hold on to. 6 days a week, minimum wage, no benefits, but it was the only thing standing between their family and an empty fridge. Their mother, Angela, hadn't worked in months, not since her heart condition got worse. Zoe, their 10-year-old sister, stayed home to watch over her. If Dorian and Caleb lost this job, there'd be no money for rent, or for Mom's meds. Being late wasn't an option. Mr. Tucker, their boss, didn't believe in second chances. Last week, a cashier was fired for walking in 4 minutes past the hour. 4. Dorian's jaw tightened. Caleb didn't say another word, just pedaled faster. The wind felt sharper now, slicing through their hoodies as they flew past shuttered storefronts and potholes. And then, Dorian saw it. Up ahead, something wasn't right. A black Cadillac, sleek but smashed, was nose first in a ditch off the side of the road, its hood steaming, windshield fractured like ice. Dorian's stomach dropped. There was someone lying on the ground. Without realizing it, he began to slow down, because no matter how bad they needed this job, some things couldn't be ignored. Dorian's tires screeched against the curb as he skidded to a halt, his heart hammering against his ribs. Caleb pulled up beside him, eyes wide. Lying just a few feet away was a man, middle-aged, dressed in a fine charcoal suit now streaked with dirt and blood. His leg was twisted at a sickening angle, his face pale under the rising morning light. A faint groan escaped his lips, barely audible. "Help. Me," the man whispered, barely able to lift his head. Caleb glanced at his phone again. 2 minutes, he muttered. "We've got 2 minutes." Dorian shot him a look. "Are you serious right now? He's dying." "I'm serious about rent, about Mom's meds," Caleb snapped, torn between the cold logic of survival and the human instinct screaming at him to do something. "We don't even know who he is. For all we know, he's some drunk rich guy who crashed his car after a night out." "So what?" Dorian's voice cracked. "That doesn't mean we leave him here to die." The man groaned again, barely conscious. Blood trickled from his temple, pooling slowly on the concrete. Dorian looked at Caleb, then at the man, and made the decision before his brother could argue further. "Forget the job." He dropped his bike with a loud clatter and rushed forward, kneeling beside the injured man. "Hey, we've got you. Stay with me, all right?" Caleb swore under his breath but followed, tossing his bike next to Dorian's. The man winced every time they tried to move him. "We're going to make it worse," Caleb said through clenched teeth. Dorian's eyes darted to their bikes. "The frames. We lay them flat, roll him on top, Make a stretcher." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," Caleb muttered. "You got a better one?" He didn't. Together, they laid the bikes down, side by side, carefully sliding the man across the metal frames. The clock was ticking, and with every second, the weight of their choice pressed heavier on their backs. And as they gripped the handlebars and began to push, Dorian realized they weren't just carrying a man. They were carrying the future on their shoulders. The man's body was heavier than they expected. Every time they shifted his weight, he let out a low, pained groan that echoed in Dorian's ears long after. Blood matted his hair, his breaths shallow and ragged, and his arm hung limp like it had given up the fight before they even started. Caleb adjusted his grip on the handlebars, his palms already slick with sweat. The metal frames of the bikes groaned under the weight, but held, barely. "We've got 4 blocks," Dorian said, more to himself than his brother. "Just 4. "Feels like 4 miles, Caleb muttered, gritting his teeth as he pushed. The wheels creaked as they rolled down the uneven street, each crack in the pavement jolting the man's body with a sharp thud. They tried to avoid potholes, but Brooklyn didn't make that easy. Dorian's legs burned, his back screamed, but he kept pushing, his eyes locked on the hospital building rising in the distance like a lifeline. A car honked as it swerved around them, its driver shouting something they couldn't hear. Dorian ignored it. The only thing that mattered was getting there in time. The man's head lolled to the side, and for a moment, Dorian thought they were too late. "Hey, stay with us," he shouted. "You're almost there. Just hold on." Caleb's breath came in short bursts, but he didn't stop. Neither of them did. Block by block, yard by yard, they fought against gravity, exhaustion, and the terrible fear that maybe none of this would matter. But then, finally, they rolled up to the sliding doors of the ER. "Help!" Dorian called, his voice raw. A team of nurses rushed out with a stretcher. Hands moved fast. A woman knelt beside the man, checking his pulse, barking orders. "What happened?" someone asked. "Car crash," Dorian managed. "He was in a ditch. We found him." "You boys did the right thing," a nurse said just before the doors slid shut, taking the man away. And just like that, he was gone. And reality came rushing back in like a storm they couldn't outrun. By the time they reached Tucker Mart, the morning rush had already begun. People shuffled in and out of the store, some with coffee, others with tired eyes and routines etched into their faces. Dorian and Caleb skidded to a stop outside, bikes clanging against the brick wall as they jumped off, breathless and soaked in sweat. Through the smudged glass windows, the hum of scanners and the dull beeping of registers filled the air. Caleb wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Maybe he won't notice," he whispered. Dorian shot him a look. "Mr. Tucker notices everything." They exchanged a glance, the kind that carried equal parts dread and resignation. Then, with shoulders squared, they pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the fluorescent-lit silence. The smell of bleach, old produce, and burnt coffee hit them instantly. A few coworkers glanced up. One shook his head, almost sympathetically. Another turned away, pretending not to see them. Dorian's heart was already sinking. Then it came. "West boys." The voice exploded from the back of the store like a firecracker. Mr. Tucker emerged from his office, his shirt stretched tight over his gut, a cigarette smoldering between 2 thick fingers even though he wasn't supposed to smoke inside. His boots thudded against the tile as he stomped toward them, his face already red with fury. "You want to tell me why the hell you're 30 minutes late?" he snapped. Dorian opened his mouth, but Tucker cut him off with a wave of the cigarette. "I don't want to hear excuses. I run a business, not a charity." "We saved someone's life," Caleb said sharply. "Oh, how noble," Tucker barked out a cold laugh. "Did he pay your wages? Huh? Did being heroes help you stock shelves?" Neither brother answered. "Thought so," he sneered. "Get out, both of you. You're done." Dorian's fists clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "We'll grab our stuff." Tucker smirked, already turning away. "Smart choice, kid." And as they walked to the back to clear their lockers, The stares of their silent co-workers felt heavier than any words. By the time they got home, the adrenaline had worn off and the weight of the morning settled in their bones. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made every creak in the floorboards sound like a warning. Dorian pushed open the door, and the scent of old heating coils and instant oatmeal hit him like a familiar ache. Zoe was humming softly in the bedroom, a tune only a 10-year-old could hum without care. Their mother, Angela, sat at the kitchen table, a pile of unpaid bills spread before her like a storm she could no longer hold back. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran her fingers across the corner of a medical notice. She didn't look up right away. "You're home, early," she said, her voice tired. Neither of them responded at first. Caleb leaned against the wall, rubbing his forehead. Dorian set his backpack down carefully, like if he made one wrong move, everything would collapse. Zoe peeked around the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Did you get fired?" she asked innocently. Caleb let out a breath between his teeth. "Yeah." Angela didn't flinch. She just closed her eyes like she'd been bracing for it all morning. She pushed the stack of bills aside slowly, then opened her eyes and looked at them with a strength Dorian always admired but never fully understood. "Tell me what happened." So they did. They told her about the car crash, the man in the ditch, how they carried him on their bikes all the way to the hospital. They told her how Mr. Tucker hadn't cared, how he'd fired them on the spot, eyes full of profit and nothing else. They told her everything, right down to the silence that followed them home. Angela didn't interrupt. She just listened, her fingertips pressed against her temples. When they finished, she let out a slow breath. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. Caleb scoffed, his voice low. "Then why does it feel like we just ruined everything?" Angela lifted her gaze, tired but certain. "Because doing the right thing doesn't always feel right, especially when the world's broken." That night, the apartment felt colder than usual. Not just from the drafty windows that never fully shut, but from the heavy silence none of them could break. The heat barely worked, sputtering like it had given up trying. Dorian sat at the small kitchen table, tapping his fingers against the chipped wood, his thoughts racing but going nowhere. They were out of time. No jobs, no savings, no way to pay for Angela's medicine or next month's rent. Zoe had fallen asleep curled on the couch, still clutching her rabbit. Their mother coughed from the bedroom, low and strained, and every sound cut into him like a blade. Caleb came in from the hallway, his hoodie zipped up but offering no warmth. His shoulders were hunched, his expression hard to read. "We need money," he said quietly. Dorian didn't look up. "I know." Caleb hesitated, then added, "I know someone." Dorian's gaze snapped toward him. "Marcus," Caleb said, nodding toward the window, like Marcus might be out there in the night air watching them. "He's got ways." Dorian stood, eyes narrowing. "No." "You don't even know what I was going to say." "I know enough," Dorian replied, his voice low but sharp. "Marcus doesn't deal in anything clean. He said he's got jobs, quick ones, no questions asked." Dorian's jaw clenched. He remembered Marcus Cole all too well, the older guy on the block with crisp sneakers, easy money, and a glare that could shut down an entire sidewalk. He never worked a real job, but he always had cash. That kind of money came with a price. "You really want to risk everything for some easy cash?" Dorian asked. "You got a better idea?" Caleb shot back. "Because Mom's meds aren't going to pay for themselves." Dorian exhaled hard, fists tightening. He didn't have an answer, not yet, but he knew one thing. Once you crossed that line, it was damn near impossible to come back. "Just give me a day," he said finally. "Let me figure something out." Caleb didn't argue. He just grabbed his hoodie and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him like a warning. And Dorian knew. He had less than 24 hours to change the course of both their lives. Dorian barely slept. He stayed up at the kitchen table, head in his hands, mind running loops with no finish line. Every solution he thought of dissolved before it could take shape. By the time the sky outside shifted from deep navy to a pale gray, his eyes were gritty, his shoulders heavy. Then the phone rang. Not his cell, the apartment's landline. No one ever called that. It was the number they kept for school contacts and bills. He stared at it for a second, heart pounding, then picked it up. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered, calm and composed. "Is this Dorian West?" He straightened instinctively. "Yeah. Who's this?" "My name is Veronica Wynne. My husband, Charles, was brought into St. Luke's 2 days ago. I believe you and your brother saved his life." Dorian's mouth went dry. His free hand gripped the edge of the table. "Wait, you're talking about the man from the crash?" "Yes," she said softly. "He's stable now, awake, and he's been asking about you both." At that moment, Caleb appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Who is it?" he mumbled. Dorian didn't answer. His brain was still trying to catch up. "We've been trying to find you," Veronica continued. "The hospital didn't get your names. We had to pull security footage to track you down." Dorian blinked. "Why?" There was a pause, brief but full. "Because we'd like to meet you," she said. "Properly. My husband. He doesn't believe he'd still be alive if it weren't for you. Are you available tomorrow morning?" He glanced at Caleb, who was now fully awake, eyebrows raised. Yeah, I guess we are." Veronica's voice remained even. "We'll send a car, 10 a.m. Then the line clicked. Dorian stared at the receiver in his hand, not entirely sure the moment had actually happened. Because in a life filled with closed doors, this one had just opened without warning, and something told him what waited on the other side wasn't anything he was prepared for. The next morning felt surreal. For once, there was no rush to work, no mental math about how much was left in the fridge or whether they could afford another week of Mom's medication. Instead, there was silence, and a black SUV idling outside their building. Caleb sat on the edge of the couch, tying and untying his shoelaces. "This is a setup," he muttered. "Gotta be. Maybe the guy died and now they're blaming us." "He didn't die," Dorian said, pulling on the least wrinkled hoodie he owned. "She said he was stable." Caleb rolled his eyes. "Still doesn't explain why rich people want to meet us. We're nobodies." Dorian didn't respond because deep down he'd wondered the same thing. They climbed into the SUV, awkward and unsure. The driver said nothing, just nodded once, then pulled off into traffic. The farther they went, the more the world changed around them. The cracked sidewalks gave way to clean, tree-lined streets. Trash disappeared. So did the graffiti. When they pulled up to the Belmont Hotel, Caleb let out a low whistle. "This place looks like it charges for air." Dorian said nothing, but he felt it too, the weight of not belonging. The doors swung open without them even touching them, and they followed a tall man in a suit through marble hallways and glittering chandeliers. Every surface gleamed, every voice was hushed. They were led to a private lounge on the top floor, quiet and pristine. Near the window stood a woman in a crisp white pantsuit. She turned as they entered, and Dorian immediately recognized the strength in her posture, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "I'm Veronica Wynne," she said, offering a small but sincere smile. "Thank you for coming." Her voice was calm but carried weight, like she was used to people listening the first time. "Please, sit." They did, awkwardly, hands on knees, eyes flicking around the room as if afraid to touch anything. Veronica sat down across from them and folded her hands. "I won't take much of your time, but first, you saved my husband's life, and I need you to know. I will never forget that." Dorian exchanged a glance with Caleb, but neither could find the right words, because something told them this was just the beginning. Veronica studied them in silence for a moment, her gaze steady but not cold. It wasn't the kind of look that sized them up for what they wore or how they spoke. It was the kind of look that saw right through the surface, straight to the weight they carried. "My husband is alive because of you," she said. "There's no debate about that. You made a choice that most people wouldn't." Dorian shifted in his seat. "We just did what anyone would have done." "No," Veronica said gently. "That's not true. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Most would have kept going, especially if their job, their survival, was on the line." Caleb looked away, jaw tightening. The truth in her words cut deeper than expected. Veronica leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her knees. "I know about your situation, your mother's condition, the job you lost, the late bills. We did our homework." Dorian stiffened. "You looked into us?" "We had to," she said calmly. "My husband is a billionaire, Mr. West. I don't let strangers close to my family without knowing who they are." Caleb sat up straighter, his voice tense. "We didn't ask for anything." "I know," Veronica replied. "That's what makes this offer sincere." Dorian's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't used to this kind of talk. Offers, choices, help that didn't come with strings hidden behind the kindness. "We want to cover your mother's medical care," Veronica continued. "She'll have access to the best doctors, full treatment, no more missed prescriptions or delayed appointments. That's already in motion." Caleb blinked. "Wait, that's real." She nodded. "It's just the beginning." Dorian's heart raced. That alone would have been life-changing. But she wasn't done. "You both lost your jobs. I understand that. But we want to offer something more than just employment." She let the pause hang before finishing. "We want to give you a fresh start. One that doesn't depend on luck or survival. Real education, real opportunity, a path forward." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with possibility. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a door. They rode home in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. The SUV hummed softly beneath them, the city flashing by in streaks of light and movement, but Dorian and Caleb sat frozen in the back seat, still trying to wrap their minds around what had just happened. By the time they stepped through the apartment door, it felt like days had passed since that morning. Angela sat at the table with a stack of overdue bills in front of her, her frail fingers gripping a pen like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Zoe was on the floor with her stuffed rabbit, but she looked up the moment the boys walked in, eyes wide. "You look weird," she said. Angela glanced up too, immediately sensing something different. "What happened?" Caleb nudged Dorian, silently pushing him forward. Dorian swallowed, stepping into the room with a breath that trembled just a little. "Mom, we need to talk." Angela's brow furrowed. She pushed the bills aside slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "Go ahead." So they told her. Everything. From the phone call to the black SUV, from the marble lobby of the Belmont Hotel to the private lounge overlooking the city. They told her about Veronica Wynne, about the man they saved, about the offer that seemed too impossible to be real. Except it was. Angela didn't interrupt. She listened, her eyes locked on her son's like she was afraid the moment would slip away if she looked anywhere else. When they finally finished, there was silence. Angela leaned back in her chair, one hand pressed gently against her chest. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Caleb said quietly. "We couldn't make this up if we tried." Angela's lips parted, but no words came. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands to cover her mouth. Her shoulders began to tremble. "They're going to pay for my treatment?" she whispered. Dorian nodded. "All of it." For a long moment she just sat there, trying to absorb it all. Then, with a voice broken and full of wonder, she said, "You saved that man's life, and now he's saving ours." 2 days later, the sound of packing tape filled the apartment. Cardboard boxes were stacked in corners, most half filled with things that barely passed as possessions. Furniture scraped across the floor as movers, real, uniformed movers, stepped carefully around the peeling linoleum and creaky baseboards. Angela sat by the door, watching it all happen with glassy eyes. She hadn't said much that morning. She didn't need to. The relief in her chest was louder than any words. Zoe twirled in the living room with joy, holding her stuffed rabbit like it was dancing with her. "Do you think our new place has a backyard?" she asked. Dorian smiled and reached over to ruffle her hair. "I think it just might." Caleb placed a box by the door and stretched, his back popping in protest. "I still don't believe this is real." "It is," Dorian said quietly. "It has to be." Outside, the sleek black SUV idled again, this time with a second vehicle behind it, ready to carry them to the other side of a life they never imagined they'd touch. Their new home was a modest but beautiful townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. The grass was green, the sidewalks weren't cracked, and the air smelled like leaves and fresh beginnings. It was nothing like where they came from. Zoe gasped the moment she stepped inside. "It's so big!" Angela stood in the doorway for a long time, just taking it in. The clean hardwood floors, the working appliances, the kitchen with actual counter space. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence was gratitude in its purest form. From behind them, a voice spoke. "It's yours now." They turned to see Veronica Wynne standing in the doorway, a soft smile on her face. Dorian walked toward her, still shaking his head. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You already did," she replied gently. Angela reached out, took Veronica's hand in hers, and held it tight. Two mothers, both understanding the weight of what had almost been lost. As Veronica turned to leave, she paused beside the boys. "This is a new chapter. Make it count." And as the door closed behind her, Dorian realized this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The new school looked nothing like the ones Dorian and Caleb had grown up in. Danforth Academy stood tall with gleaming windows, ivy-covered walls, and banners that fluttered gently in the breeze. Proud declarations of state championships, college acceptances, and traditions that went back generations. It was more than a school. It was a fortress of privilege. Dorian held his backpack tighter as they stepped through the polished front gates. Caleb walked a few steps behind, eyeing the students who passed them. Every one of them dressed in fresh sneakers, fitted coats, and backpacks that probably cost more than anything they owned. "Yeah," Caleb muttered under his breath, "we stick out like sore thumbs." Dorian kept his shoulders squared. "Then we work twice as hard." "Twice as hard just to get half as far," Caleb shot back. "Sounds about right." The hallways smelled like lemon polish and clean paper. Teachers smiled politely but moved on quickly. Students glanced, whispered, looked away. They weren't hostile, just curious, detached. The kind of curiosity that didn't come from interest but from wondering how long two kids like them would last here. Lunchtime didn't help. Dorian and Caleb sat alone at the end of a long cafeteria table while the other students clustered in groups that seemed impenetrable. Caleb picked at his food, his jaw tight. "Feels like we're charity cases," he said. Dorian didn't argue. He felt it too, but he also remembered Veronica's words. Make it count. This wasn't about fitting in. This was about building something that would last longer than the stairs. "We didn't get this shot just to waste it," Dorian finally said, steady and low. Caleb looked at him for a long second, then nodded once. "Fine. But if one of those kids calls me urban like it's a compliment, I'm punching someone." Dorian cracked a smile, just a small one. They weren't welcome here yet. That much was clear, but they had walked through worse. And this time, they had something no one could take from them. Hope. The first few weeks at Danforth were rough. Caleb struggled more than he let on. His quick wit now turned inward, his usual confidence dulled by side eyes and backhanded compliments. Every time someone asked where he was from, it felt less like conversation and more like evaluation. Dorian kept his head down, his mind focused. He stayed up late reading, taking notes, absorbing every lecture like it was fuel for the next climb. He wasn't trying to just get by. He wanted to prove something. To himself. To everyone who thought kids like them didn't belong here. Mr. Becker, his literature teacher, noticed. "Stay after class for a minute," he said one afternoon. Dorian's first instinct was panic. Had he done something wrong? But when the room emptied, Mr. Becker leaned against his desk and said simply, "You've got something, Dorian. Have you ever thought about applying to Washington University?" Dorian blinked. "The Washington? The one with full rides that people write essays for 2 years straight to even get considered?" "That one," Mr. Becker smiled. "You're exactly the kind of student they're looking for." Dorian didn't know what to say. No one had ever said something like that to him before. Not a teacher, not anyone. That night, he sat on the front porch of their new house, the sky overhead a stretch of quiet stars. He didn't feel like an outsider here, not completely. For the first time, he felt possible. Inside, Caleb was blasting music while working on an essay. He'd stopped complaining as much. He still grumbled, sure, but Dorian saw it. The way he raised his hand in the class, how he started sitting a little straighter even when he was alone. Like maybe, just maybe, he believed they could belong here too. The world hadn't exactly opened its arms to welcome them, but it also hadn't shut the door. And now they were starting to realize belonging wasn't something given. It was something earned. One day, one choice, one determined step at a time. It was a Thursday afternoon when Dorian saw him, Marcus Cole, leaning against a graffiti-tagged wall on the edge of their old neighborhood. Dorian had taken a detour after school, something in him needing to see where he came from. The street looked the same. Same cracked sidewalks, same corner store blasting music too loud, same kids dribbling a worn-out basketball in the alley. But Marcus wasn't alone. He was talking to a small group of boys, barely 13 by the looks of them. They stood in a tight circle, listening closely, nodding at every word. One of them shifted nervously, glancing around like he knew he shouldn't be there. Dorian didn't need to hear what Marcus was saying. He already knew. He crossed the street. "Yo," he called out, his voice steady. Marcus turned, that same smug grin, that same sharp glint in his eyes. Well, well, if it isn't Mr. Private School. Dorian didn't rise to it. He looked past Marcus, straight at the kids. "Y'all should go home." They hesitated. One of them looked to Marcus for permission. Another glanced at Dorian's clean shoes and stiff backpack, unsure who to trust. "Damn," Marcus laughed. "Look at you. That fancy place got you thinking you better than us." "I'm not better," Dorian said calmly. "Just lucky, and I know where this story goes." Marcus's grin faltered. The boys backed away slowly, one by one, until the corner was empty. Silence settled between them. "You think they're going to let you stay up there?" Marcus asked, bitterness creeping into his voice. "They'll always see you for what you are." Dorian took a breath. "Maybe. Maybe not. But I know what I'm not doing. Dragging kids into the same trap we almost didn't escape." Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, jaw tight. "We'll see how long that luck lasts." Then he turned and disappeared down the street like a shadow melting into old pavement. Dorian stood alone, staring after him, not with anger, but with a quiet ache. Because he knew the truth. Some people didn't want to escape, and some stories didn't get rewritten. But his still could. Months passed. The leaves turned gold, then brittle before falling as winter crept in again. Angela grew stronger by the day, her voice clearer, her smile returning. The medicine came regularly now. The bills stopped. Zoe slept through the night without flinching at every creak. Caleb found his rhythm, raising his hand in class, writing essays that teachers actually praised. and Dorian. Got the letter. Washington University. Accepted. One evening, he sat on the front porch, the sky stretched wide with stars, the air cold and clean. In his lap, the letter. In his chest, a quiet disbelief. Then footsteps behind him. "You kept your promise," a voice said. Dorian turned. Veronica Wynne stood at the edge of the porch, her expression soft. "What do you mean?" he asked. She stepped closer. "The rule I gave you. Help someone else when the time comes." Dorian thought of the kids he'd turned away from Marcus, how close they'd come to making the same mistake he and Caleb had almost made, and how, for once, someone had been there to stop them. "I didn't even realize I was doing it," he said. Veronica smiled. "That's the best kind of promise to keep." As she walked away, Dorian looked down at the letter again. He'd spent years surviving, protecting, struggling, but now, for the first time, he was living. And this wasn't just a fresh start. It was the beginning of a legacy. We don't always get to choose the world we're born into, but we always get to choose who we become in it. Dorian and Caleb could have kept riding. They could have looked away, convinced themselves it wasn't their problem, and no one would have blamed them. But they didn't. They stopped. They helped. And in doing so, they changed the trajectory of not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Because doing the right thing often costs something. Comfort, stability, security. But it also plants seeds we can't always see right away. Seeds that grow into healing, into hope, into redemption. And when we choose compassion over convenience, integrity over comfort, humanity over fear, the universe sometimes responds in ways we never expect. So, be the one who stops. Be the one who helps. Be the one who chooses right, even when it's hard. Because you never know who's watching. And you never know what kind of miracle might be watching you.